serving as military specialist for Carleton County. I'm going to give you another presentation tonight. This one is the Invasion of Belgium, May 10th, 1940. The Invasion of Belgium is the next, of course, this is part 3 of Case Yellow, or Fall Grade. This is the next stage of what I'm going to talk about, which will last about a bit over 2 weeks. And of course, this battle having a lot more soldiers in it. This is the main force that's going to thrust through Belgium and into France, and of course pushing the British to the English Channel with Dunkirk. And all right, so here's the Belgian flag. So Leopold III of Belgium, the King of Belgium. On the outbreak of World War II, Leopold tried to maintain Belgian neutrality, but after the German invasion in May 1940, he surrendered his country, earning him much hostility, both at home and abroad. His act was declared unconstitutional by Prime Minister Hubert Perlot and his cabinet, who presently moved to London to form a government in exile, while Leopold and his family were placed under house arrest. In 1944, they were moved to Germany and then Austria, before being liberated by the Americans, but banned for some years from returning to Belgium, where his brother, Prince Charles, had been declared regent. Leopold's eventual return to his homeland in 1950 nearly caused a civil war, and under pressure from the government, he abdicated in favor of his son, Prince Baudouin, in July 1951. So Hubert Perlot, the 32nd Prime Minister of Belgium. A member of the Catholic Party, Perlot became Prime Minister in 1939, shortly after Belgium entered the Second World War. Or shortly before Belgium entered the Second World War, sorry. In this capacity, he headed the Belgian government in exile, first from France and later Britain, while Belgium was under German occupation. During the German invasion of Belgium in May 1940, a violent disagreement broke out between Perlot and King Leopold III over whether the king should allow the orders of his ministers and go into exile, should follow the orders of his ministers and should go into exile or surrender to the German army. Perlot considered Leopold's subsequent surrender a breach of the constitution and encouraged the parliament to declare Leopold unfit to reign. The confrontation provoked a lasting animosity between Perlot and other conservatives, who supported the king's position and considered the government's exile to be cowardly. The Battle of Belgium, which is also known as the Belgian campaign, took place over 18 days in part of the Battle of France in 1940. It was an offensive operation by the Germans in the Second World War. The Allied armies had thought that this battle was Germany's main attack, so they tried to impede the Germans in Belgium. The battle ended with the Germans occupying Belgium after the Belgian Army had surrendered. The Belgian campaign included the Battle of Fort Ibn Imal, which was the first tactical airborne operation using paratroopers. So that was on May 10th. So paratroopers being used. No, I thought it was Holland, but so Belgium. This all took place. Remember, the same attacks, similar attacks are happening. Holland, and then of course Luxembourg, Guderian, and then Belgium, all on the same day. It also included the first tank battle. Made the biggest tank battle of its time early in the war, but at the time it was the largest in history. The Battle of Hanut. This is the largest and the first one of the war. The collapse of the Belgian Army prompted the Allied forces to withdraw from continental Europe. So the numbers are: the Allied had 144 divisions, 13,974 guns, 3,000 384 tanks, 2,249 aircraft. That's the Belgians, the British, the French, and the Dutch. Because the Dutch had some units that were pushed out of Holland and tried to help with the Belgian operation. The Germans had 141 divisions, 7,378 guns, 2,445 tanks, 5,446 aircraft, including 4,020 operational. Belgian neutrality. So here's the North Sea, and Germany, and of course Belgium. And of course here is after the conquering of Holland. That's Holland up there, and Belgium is there on the the lower left corner. Before World War II, King Leopold of Belgium was advocating for a more independent foreign policy for Belgium. On two occasions, he advocated for mediation of the conflict between the Western Allies and Nazi forces a few months before and after the war broke out in 1939. Although Germany had invaded Belgium in 1914, Belgium returned to a neutrality policy after the war. Before the 1940 invasion, King Leopold prompted the construction of vital defensive fortifications from Namur to Antwerp in front of the German border, of course. However, the Germans quickly took the defenses. Belgians were in full support of Leopold's strategy of armed neutrality. Belgians wanted to be left alone and in peace. Of course, it didn't work out that way. Seen here, panzers are moving in to Belgium. Here, and at least over roughly 200,000, well, sorry, 200,000, more than 200,000, up to 700,000 troops moving and pushing forward and eventually through the Ardennes, and then, of course, into France. The numbers vary, but of course, every country that has been attacked by Nazi forces so far has failed to stop them. Even with the numbers in Norway, it still did not stop the Wehrmacht, the German military machine, from taking the country and taking most of the initiatives. The Germans invaded Belgium for the second time on May 10, 1940. Vollgelb, case yellow. The Germans struck both the Netherlands and Belgium at the same time, as well as Luxembourg, marking the start of the long-expected German invasion in the West. They started their Western campaign on a wide front against the neutral Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. The Belgian Defenses. So initially, Belgium had joined World War I allies after the first German invasion. However, when the war ended, Belgians decided to seek security through a neutrality policy. There was no military collaboration with France and Britain as Adolf Hitler moved steadily toward war. Anti-war sentiment was strong in Belgium, as the Belgians thought that any cooperation with the Allies would attract the aggression of the Germans. For this reason, when Hitler instigated World War II, the government of Belgium affirmed her neutrality and refused to allow the French and British from entering the country to reinforce Belgium's defenses. The Belgian army could muster maybe 22 divisions, which contained 1,338 artillery pieces, but just 10 AMC-35 tanks. However, the Belgian combat vehicles included 200 T-13 tank destroyers. These had an excellent 47mm anti-tank gun and a coaxial FN-30 machine gun in the turret. The Belgians also possessed 42 T-15s. They were officially described as armored cars, but were actually fully tracked tanks with a 13.2mm turret machine gun. The standard Belgian anti-tank gun was the 47mm FRC, towed either by trucks or by fully tracked armored utility B tractors. One report states that a round from a 47mm gun went straight through an SDKZ 231 and penetrated armor of the Panzer IV behind it, which is pretty damn good. These Belgian guns were better than the 25mm and 37mm guns of respectively the French and the Germans. The Belgians began mobilization on the 25th of August 1939, and by May 1940 mounted a field army of 18 infantry divisions, 2 divisions of partly motorized Chasseurs Ardennes, and 2 motorized cavalry divisions, a total force of some 600,000 men. Belgian reserves may have been able to field 900,000 men. The army lacked armor and anti-aircraft guns, like many of the countries that the Germans are invading. So here's the Belgian Army, 1940. So here's the Belgian Army, 1940, as I mentioned. This is the rifle that they have is the Mauser model 1889. It's very similar to a lot of the rifles of its time. It's a bolt action, 5-round internal magazine. So of course this was used from 1889 to the 1960s. Its design manufacturer is still definitely producing weapons today, like FN FAL, whatnot. It's Fabrique Nationale, which will be Herschel later on. 275,000 builds. I mean, it's a semi-reliable rifle. It's chambered in 7.65 times 53, or 7.92 times 57 Mauser, which is the German standard round for their machine guns and their Kar 98 rifles. This here is a sergeant from, so 1, there's 2 and 3, there's a sergeant from the 13th Line Regiment, a lieutenant from the 3rd Lancier Regiment, corporal, 1st Ardennes Regiment. This is in May 24th and 25th, 1940. This is when, these are the uniforms they're wearing at the time of the war. And, yep. So, after the completion of the Belgian Army's mobilization, it could muster 5 regular corps and 2 reserve army corps consisting of 12 regular infantry divisions, 2 divisions of Chasseurs Ardennes, 6 reserve infantry divisions, 1 brigade of cyclist frontier guards, 1 cavalry corps of 2 divisions, and 1 brigade of motorized cavalry. The Army contained 2 anti-aircraft artillery and 4 artillery regiments, and an unknown number of fortress engineer and signal force personnel. The Belgian Naval Corps, Corps de Marines, was erected in 1939. Most of the Belgian merchant fleet, some 100 ships, evaded capture by the Germans. Under the terms of a Belgian Royal Navy agreement, these ships and their 3,350 crewmen were placed under British control for the duration of hostilities. The general headquarters of the Belgian Admiralty was at Ostend under the command of Major Henry de Carpentry. The 1st Naval Division was based at Ostend as well, while the 2nd and 3rd Divisions were based at Zeebrugge and Antwerp. The Belgians were afforded substantial support by the French army. The French First Army included General René Préault's cavalry corps. The corps was given the 2nd Light Mechanized Division, 2nd Division Légère Mécanique, or 2E DLM, and the 3rd Light Mechanized Division, 3E DLM, which were allocated to defend the Gembloux Gap. The armored forces consisted of 176 of the formidable small S-35 tanks, which you'll see in pictures what I have here, and the 239 Hotchkiss H-35 light tanks. Both of these types in armor and firepower were superior to most German types. And these French designs could penetrate armor of Panzer Is and Panzer IIs. The 3 DLM contained 90 S-35s and some 140 H-35s alone. The French 7th Army was assigned to protect the northernmost part of the Allied front, which I mentioned before in battles in Holland, and of course from Case Yellow. I've mentioned it in other cases. Definitely with Holland, and they were of course pushed back out of Holland, I believe, or what I remember. It contained the 1st Light Mechanized Division, 1 RE DLM, and the 25th Motorized Infantry Division, 25E Division der Infanterie Motorisée, or 25E DIM, and the 9th Motorized Infantry Division, 9E DIM. This force would advance to Breda in the Netherlands. There we go. That's them. The 3rd French Army to see action on Belgian soil was the 9th. It was weaker than both the 7th and the 1st Armies. The 9th Army was allocated infantry divisions, with the exception of the 5th Motorized Infantry Division, 5E DIM. Its mission was to protect the southern flank of the Allied armies, south of the Sambre River, and just north of Sudan. Further south in France was the French 2nd Army, protecting the Franco-Belgian border between Sudan and Montmedy. The 2 weakest French armies were thus protecting the area of the main German thrust. And here, what we have is a tank. Is the Char B. It's the biggest tank in the French arsenal. Char B is a capable tank and used in the Battle of Hanut, and I believe it was Sedan as well. The Cavalry Corps was the main mechanized strike force of the French military. Because of mission requirements, the French light mechanized divisions deployed their tanks thinly across long lines on the battlefield, so they lost many to attrition. On the other hand, the Germans concentrated their tanks on a single key point and gained the decisive advantage in battle. Char B was the French father of tanks. It was capable. The Char de Bataille battle tank was a heavy tank near to the Char de Rupture or breakthrough tank. It's what they call. But the former, of course, this design was meant as an infantry support and basically anti-tank machine. So it's designed as an infantry tank and basically a support tank. And so this tank, of course, 28 tons. That's quite a heavy tank. The crew of 4, armor of 40 millimeter. It's the Char B1 design, and even the Biz upgraded variant had a 60 millimeters. The main armament of this tank is 75 millimeter ABS SA 35 howitzer. So you know it's a quite a heavy machine. It did take some enemy hits, of course, and you're looking at the Battle of Sedan, you're looking at the whole conflict in Belgium. This is one of the major tanks that the French army certainly had, and you can see here, like in the Battle of Hanut, this tank, along with the S-35, is one of the main ones used. Overall, it was designed. Char B1 is designed as a breakthrough tank with a self-propelled gun. I mean, it's quite a machine. Even though it did not stop the German advance, they were deployed too thinly, right? So, getting back to what I was talking about here, although the French cavalry fought hard during the Battle of Hanut and achieved their objective of stalling the German advance, they were still defeated by the Germans, despite being stopped at the strategic Gambloux Gap for 3 days and having to watch the Allied forces deploy along the River Dyle, the Germans still managed to win strategically in maneuverability. Um, in the Ardennes to the south, German Panzergruppe Kleist had secretly crossed the mountainous terrain in preparation for the most threatening and lethal blitz against the Allies. Here's the Charbie again, and here's one that's captured, I think, by German forces. So here's one of the Belgian anti-tank guns. I think it was that or British. I think. So the British contribution to this section. The British contributed the weakest force to Belgium, the Battle Expeditionary Force, British Expeditionary Force rather, under the command of General Lord Gort, VC, consisted of just 152,000 men in two corps of 2 divisions each. It was hoped to field 2 armies of 2 corps each, but this scale of mobilization never took place. The I Corps, the first corps, was commanded by Lieutenant General John Dill, later Lieutenant General Michael Barker, who was in turn replaced by Major General Harold Alexander. Lieutenant General Alan Brooke commanded the Second Corps. Later, the Third Corps under Lieutenant General Roland Adam was added to the British order of battle. A further 9,392 Royal Air Force RAF personnel of the RAF Advanced Air Striking Force under the command of Air Vice Marshal Patrick Playfair was to support operations in Belgium. By May 1940, the British Expeditionary Force had grown to 394,165 men, of which more than 150,000 were part of the logistical rear area organizations and had little military training, which is unfortunate. On the 10th of May 1940, when the invasion, when KCL began, the British Expeditionary Force just had 10 divisions, not all at full strength. It comprised of just 10 divisions, 1,280 artillery pieces, and 310 tanks. And this here, what you see is a Bren Gun Carrier. The universal carrier is well used and well known in the early in the war and continuing throughout 1944, 1943, 1944, 1945. And we definitely use them. The Canadian Expeditionary Forces use them in Holland and continued to and they've been used up until past the end of the war. So German forces, Army Group B was commanded by Führer von Bock. It was allocated to 26 infantry and 3 panzer divisions for the invasion of the Netherlands and Belgium. Of the 3 panzer divisions, the 3rd and the 4th were to operate in Belgium under the command of the 6th Army's 14 Corps. So the 9th Panzer Division was attached to the 18th Army, which, after the Battle of the Netherlands, would support the push into Belgium alongside the 18th Army and cover its northern flank. Armor strength in Army Group B amounted to 808 tanks, of which 282 were Panzer Is, 288 were Panzer IIs, and 123 were Panzer IIIs, and 66 were Panzer IVs. Panzer IVs being the newest variant of the Panzer design and the most heavily armored and frontal armor, as well as like the Panzer IIIs. 49 command tanks were also operational. The 3rd Panzer Division's armored regiments consisted of 117 Panzer Is, 128 Panzer IIs, 42 Panzer IIIs, and 26 Panzer IVs, and then 27 command tanks. The 4th Panzer Division had 136 Panzer Is, 105 Panzer IIs, 40 Panzer IIIs, and 24 Panzer IVs, and 10 command tanks. The 9th Panzer, scheduled initially for operations in the Netherlands, was the weakest division with only 30 Panzer Is, 54 IIs, 123 123 different. Okay, so Panzer Is 54, Panzer IIs 123, 66 Panzer IIIs. Sorry, got confused there, and then 49 Panzer IVs. The elements drawn from the 7th Air Division and the 22nd Air Landing Division that were to take part in the attack on Fort Ibn Imal were renamed Sturmabteilung Kosch, Assault Detachment Kosch, named after the commanding officer of the group, Hauptmann Walter Kosch. The force was assembled in November 1939. It was primarily comprised of parachutists from the 1st Parachute Regiment and engineers from the 7th Air Division, as well as a small group of Luftwaffe pilots. The Luftwaffe allocated about 1,815 combat and 487 transport aircraft, and then 50 gliders for the assault on the Low Countries. The initial airstrikes over Belgian airspace were to be conducted by 4 Flagger Corps under Flagger, General Oberst Alfred Keller. Keller's force consisted of Leichtschauwider, 1 Stab, so Stab 1, 2, 3, and 4. Kampfschweider, 30. Stab 2, 3, and Stab 1, 2, and 3, and Kampfschweider 27, which are units. On 10th of May, Keller had 363 aircraft, 224 serviceable, augmented by General Major Wolfram von Weisthofen's 8th Corps. Flagger Corps with 550. There'll be 420 serviceable aircraft. So that's one unit, and then they in turn were supported by Oberst Bertram von Döring's Jagdflaggerführer 2 with 462 aircraft, 313 serviceable. Keller's 4th Flagger Corps headquarters would operate from Dusseldorf, LG1. Kampfgrosswalder 30, which was based in Oldenburg, and its 3rd Gruppe were based at Marx, and so that's where they pushed in forward into Belgium. Support for Döring and von Richthofen came from present-day North Rhine-Westphalia and bases in Grevenbroich. Some of these names: Wolfengohnwast, Dortmund, and Essen. Here's a Panzer. I think it is a Panzer II. Nope. Yeah, that's a. Yeah, I believe that's a Panzer II or early 3 variant. Yeah, it was a Panzer II anyway. Panzer II is it's one of their earlier variants. Of course, the Panzer IIIs and IVs were heavily armored and had a better and of course more powerful gun. Been a long day, sorry. This was a large underground fort that dominated. This is Fort Ibn Imal. This was an underground fort that dominated 3 well-secured bridges over the Albert Canal. The fort was modeled on the French Maginot Line forts and was considered to be impenetrable. Over 1,200 Belgian soldiers manned the fort 24/7. Despite this strong defense, a 400-man German glider force attacked the fort silently on the dawn of May 10, 1940, landing 9 gliders directly on the fort's top. They then forced their way to the gun emplacements through the roofs and disabled the guns quickly. The KW line, Kilo Whiskey line. Belgians held on the K Whiskey line on their own from 10th of May to the 13th, providing a very strong defense. On the 13th of May, the Germans deployed a Panzer division which was supported by Luftwaffe and broke through the Allied lines in the Ardennes forest. The Belgians and the French were very shocked by this, since they believed that the region where the Maginot Line ended close to Sedan was impenetrable. When the Germans broke through the Sedan area, the French troops retreated. This forced the Belgian troops to abandon their strong defense position along the KW line. And we'll talk more about the Battle of Sedan and the Battle of Hanut later on here, further in. So the German forces near Maastricht crossed the Albert Canal into Belgium on the first day of the invasion, having neutralized the fortress of Imau with an audacious pre-dawn airborne assault. Arriving silently in gliders, several hundred elite German Fallschirmjäger paratroops landed atop the fort and began systematically destroying the turrets and casemates with shaped charges. Soon after daylight, they were joined by 300 additional infantrymen arriving by parachute. By noon of May 11th, the 1,000-man garrison had surrendered, and the path to Leg lay open. The German concealed the details of their operation so well that Allied strategists believed that Ibn Imau must have fallen due to some sort of treachery, and the facts of the fort's capture would not be known until after the war, and kept it a secret. The Panzer breakthrough. So here we have Panzer IIIs and IVs. These are, I believe a large portion of them pushing in relatively quickly. These are Panzer IIIs, I believe, and IVs are coming up the line. So main elements of Panzer Group Kleist under General Paul Ludwig von Kleist crossed the Maas River on 13th of May. By the following day, the Germans had breached the Maas-Albert Canal line in force and entered France just west of Sedan. Relentless pounding by Stuka dive bombers, Ju-87Bs, shattered the morale of the French defenders in this sector. French commanders had believed so strongly in the impossibility of assault through the Ardennes that the troops there were almost completely lacking in anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft guns. For its part, the Maginot Line had not been broken. The German penetration had occurred at a weak extension of the line along the Belgian frontier, and the defenses that existed there were undermanned by troops of lesser quality. Nevertheless, the area which the line had been meant to protect had been invaded. And that in time forced the evacuation of the Maginot Line itself. Here is Paul Ludwig Ewald von Kleist, 8th August 1881 to 13th November 1954, was a German field marshal during World War II, one of Hitler's top men, an early pioneer of blitzkrieg warfare. Kleist was the commander of Panzer Group Kleist, later the 1st Panzer Army, the first operational formation of several Panzer Corps in the Wehrmacht during the Battle of France, the Battle of Belgium, the invasion of Yugoslavia, and of course Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. In May 1940, Panzer Group Kleist was formed, the first operational formation of several Panzer Corps in the Wehrmacht. Panzer Group Kleist consisting of 14th Corps, 14th, 41st, and 19th Panzer Corps under Hans Guderian. That's what I believe it is, 19th. Yep. And of course, they played a pivotal role in the invasion of Belgium, France, and the Low Countries. On the 10th of May, it spearheaded the German breakthrough in the Ardennes as it advanced through southern Belgium. Kleist and Guderian clashed over where the main point of effort should fall. Kleist, Guderian's immediate superior, pressed for the main point to come at Fliz, further west than Sudan. Kleist argued that the blow would avoid a double river crossing at the Maas at Sudan, and of course the Ardennes Canal to the west of Sudan. Moreover, the blow would strike at the dividing line between the French Ninth Army and the French Second Army. Guderian saw things differently and pointed out that a thrust along the lines of Kleist's plan would put the flank of the advance within range of the fortress artillery at Charlevoix-Mézières, some 25 kilometers, 16 miles northwest of Sedan. Guderian was certainly worried about French artillery. You see here. So here is, I believe it is the Battle of Sedan, and British troops that have surrendered. French troops have surrendered. Yeah, British troops. They are bringing over, of course, the equipment across the line, and of course, in this push through Sudan is just one step to taking Belgium and then going into France. See here is the 19th Panzer Corps and Guderian's Corps. So first and second Panzer Corps here, pushing down into Belgium. So, and then of course the 21st Corps here. That's the French 21st Corps. So you can see here, 3rd North African Division. That's some of the French forces. Then of course the Belgians are pushing in, and then they're going to put the trap door on the British and push them out to the sea. Sudan, already notorious as the site of a German victory in 1870, with a small city of about 12,000 inhabitants, lying mostly on the Ardennes side of the Maas. It had been decided in advance to abandon the city and destroy the bridges if an attack occurred. The French would defend the other side of the Maas, exploiting the natural obstacles offered by the river and the high ground of the left bank actually. From the forested hill of Le Mafri, the French defenders had a superb view over the Germans on the other side. Thus, Hunsaker considered Sedan to be the least vulnerable sector in his line. That's the French commander, I believe. His main worry was that the Germans might attack further to the southeast in the vicinity of Mouzon, with a view to taking the Maginot Line from the rear. To counter this eventuality, Hunsaker had stationed his best units on his right flank. The 11th kilometer of the Sudan sector on his left flank was defended by the B series reservists of the 55 DI. Quite apart from their deficiencies as soldiers, they were extremely short of anti-aircraft weapons. There was only one anti-aircraft battery in the whole area. When the German planes attacked, many men had only machine guns and rifles to use against them. On the night of the 12th and 13th of May, French artillery was effective in hampering German movements to the north of the Maas, where the steady arrival of German troops and armor provided an easy target. Then at 11 a.m. on the morning of 13th of May, German planes started to attack the French positions. Kleist's group had about 1,000 planes at its disposal, mostly around Sedan. This was a massive concentration of air power for such a narrow sector of the front. For the for the next 8 hours, wave upon wave of German Stuka bombers pounded the French in what was one of the heaviest air assaults so far in military history. Although these attacks did little damage to French bunkers and gun positions, they had a devastating effect on morale. At about 3 p.m., after this prolonged bombardment, the Germans had started their attempt to cross the Maas. Guderian planned to use his 3 divisions for a three-pronged attack. The 10th Panzer Division was to cross on the left, and once across the river to secure the high ground of the Marfee Heights above the village of Wunderlin-Court. The crossing was difficult. To reach the edge of the river and launch their rubber dinghies, the German troops had to wade through waterlogged meadows, all the time offering a prime target to the French troops defending the Marfee Heights. Most of the boats were shot to pieces before they could even be thrown into the river. If the Germans did succeed in obtaining a foothold on the other bank, this success was due above all to the initiatives of a few individuals. Among these was Staff Sergeant Rubarth and his squad of assault engineers. Having managed to cross the river, their dinghy only precariously afloat because of the weight of equipment it was carrying, they were able to rush the French bunkers with surprising ease. As Rubarth himself described the events later, in a violent Stuka attack, the enemy's defensive line is bombarded. With the dropping of the last bomb at 1500 hours, we moved forward and attacked with the infantry. We immediately sustained strong machine gun fire. There are casualties. With my section, I reached the bank of the Maas in a rush through a wood line. Enemy machine guns fire from the right flank across the Maas. The rubber boat moves across the water. During the crossing, constant firing from our machine guns batter the enemy, and thus not one casualty occurs. I land with my rubber boat near a strong, small bunker, and together with Lance Corporal Podzus, put it out of action. We seize the next bunker from the rear. I fire an explosive charge. In a moment, the force of the detonation tears off the rear part of the bunker. We use the opportunity and attack the occupants with hand grenades, Mark 24 hand grenades, German steel hand grenades. After a short fight, a white flag appears. Encouraged by this, we fling ourselves against 2 additional small bunkers, which we know are around 100 meters to our half left. In doing so, we move through a swampy area, so that we must temporarily stand in the water up to our hips. And this is here, you can see the Sudan and the crossing. The most vital sector of the Sudan crossing point was assigned to the 1st Panzer Division, which was to cross at the village of Glair, just west of Sudan, at the base of a small peninsula formed by a loop in the river. As the troops hurled hundreds of rubber boats into the river and jumped after them, many were killed by French gunfire, but enough reached the other side to rush the French defenses. Particularly spectacular results were achieved by troops of the 1st German Infantry Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hermann Bauch. Some of these names. A tough veteran of the Great War, in which he had been wounded 5 times, Bauch was an exceptionally inspiring commander who was to end the war as an army group general. Having succeeded in crossing the river, Bauch and his men found 4 French bunkers in their path. They bypassed one, two others succumbed relatively easily, and indeed may have been abandoned by their defenders, and the fourth held out for about 3 hours. By 7 p.m., Bell's men had covered the 2.5 kilometer from the Maas to the Chateau de Belleville, um, Bellevue, sorry, Chateau de Bellevue. 3 hours later, they had reached the village of Chivas, about 3 kilometers further south. Already by 5:30 p.m., 17:30 p.m., the German foothold on the left bank was sufficient for engineers to begin building a bridge. Meanwhile, rafts ferried over equipment. By 11 p.m., a bridge was capable of bearing weight of 16 tons was ready, and the first tanks started to cross. And here is, of course, Richelieu, Klung, List, Kleist, Reinhard, and Guderian, the armored forces moving in and across the Sudan. Here's Antwerp, Brussels, that's the capital of Belgium. So here's the line from May 14th here, front line May 14th, and how far they've succumbed May 21st. They've taken Arras, Abbeville, Cambrai, Lorne, and Amiens, and of course Calais, and Rabaul, Lille, and Boulogne, Brugge, and then eventually Dunkirk. So on the 15th of May, Hans Guderian's, sorry, I was looking for something here. Sorry, on 15th of May, Hans Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps broke through the French line and headed west into open country. The pace of the advance was breathtaking, and by all previous standards of war, it was a disaster in the making. The German armored salient was narrow and its flanks thinly held, if held at all, with a tip of some 150 miles, more than 240 kilometers, from the main body of the German advance. To the north lay the entire Belgian Army, most of the British Expeditionary Force, and at least two French armies, amounting to nearly 1 million men, while the remainder of the French army lay behind and to the south of them. Indeed, Guderian's superiors attempted to slow his progress to allow for a consolidation of forces, but he perceived the importance of maintaining his momentum, characterizing his continued advance as reconnaissance in force. Guderian pressed on. On the 17th of May, Guderian crossed the Oise River and entered the valley of the Somme, down which he raced to its mouth at Abbeville. Having reached the English Channel on the 20th of May, Guderian had effectively severed communications between the Allied forces to the north and to the south. He paused briefly to allow German mechanized units to reinforce his flank along the Somme before swinging north to threaten the Channel ports of Calais and Dunkirk on the 22nd of May. So Heinz William Guderian. So June 17th, 1888 to, of course, 14th of May, 1954, was a German general during the Second World War who, after the war, became a successful memoirist. So he, like I mentioned before in the other presentations, an early pioneer and an advocate of the Blitzkrieg approach, he played a central role in the development of the Panzer Division concept. In 1936, he became the inspector of motorized troops. At the beginning of the Second World War, Guderian led an armored corps in the invasion of Poland. During the invasion of France, he commanded the armored units that attacked through the Ardennes forest and overwhelmed the Allied defenses at the Battle of Sedan. He led the 2nd Panzer Army during Operation Barbarossa in the invasion of the Soviet Union. The campaign ended in failure after the German offensive Operation Typhoon failed to capture Moscow, after which Guderian was dismissed. So here's Hans Guderian. Hans Guderian was essential in developing the Panzer Division approach and the Blitzkrieg approach, as I mentioned. During August 1939, Guderian took command of the newly formed 19th Army Corps. At short notice, he was ordered to spearhead the northern elements of the invasion of Poland, which began on 1st September. Under his corps' command was one of Germany's 6 Panzer divisions. Guderian's corps controlled about 14.5% of Germany's armored fighting vehicles. His task was to advance through the former West Prussian territory, which included his birthplace of Culm, then travel through East Prussia before heading south towards Warsaw. Guderian used the German concept of leading forward, which required commanders to move to the battlefront and assess the situation. He made use of modern communication systems by traveling in a radio-equipped command vehicle with which he kept himself in contact with Corps command. Yeah, so this is the Blitzkrieg offensive and being able to swoop and cut off an Allied supply lines and encirclement using, of course, the anvil tactic, being able to cut off supply lines. That's certainly was used in Poland and is certainly being used in Belgium as I speak now. So during the evening of 9th of May, going back then, the Belgian military attaché in Berlin intimated that the Germans intended to attack the following day. So this is going back to the beginning. The offensive movement of enemy forces were detected on the border, and by 010 on the 10th of May 1940 at General Headquarters, an unspecified squadron in Brussels gave the alarm. A full state of alert was instigated on 01:30 a.m. Belgian forces took up their deployment positions. The Allied armies had enacted their Dial plan on the morning of 10th of May and were approaching the Belgian rear. King Leopold had gone to his headquarters near Brigden, Antwerp. So this is just the beginning of what was the invasion of course, Luxembourg, Holland, and Belgium. The Luftwaffe was to spearhead the aerial battle in the Low Countries. Its first task was the elimination of the Belgian air contingent. Despite an overwhelming numerical superiority of 1,375 aircraft, 957 of which were serviceable, the air campaign in Belgium had limited success overall on the first day. At roughly 400 hours, the first air raids were conducted against airfields and communication centers. It still had a tremendous impact on the AEMI, which had, of course, only 179 aircraft on 10th of May. That's the Belgian Air Force. Much of the success achieved was down to Richthofen's subordinates, particularly Consulwager 77 and its commander Oberst der John Volkmar Wieser, whose attachment was 8th Corps, the Flagger Corps, was noted by General Major William Spedel. Of course, and this is the initial attack. And some of these are, of course, paratroopers and heavy bombing strikes by the Luftwaffe. So, fighters from Kaswager 27 eliminated 2 Belgian squadrons at near Hispin, and during the afternoon, STG-2 destroyed 9 of the 15 Fiat CR-42 fighters at Brustham. And then, of course, this is a very similar attack that had happened on Holland and, of course, Luxembourg. same style as Blitzkrieg is known. That's the East, 3 Hawker Hurricanes of Escadrille 2, 1, and 2 were destroyed, and another 6 damaged when a wave of HE-111s caught them as they were about to take off. A further 2 were lost in destroyed hangars. At Neville's airfield, 13 CR-42s were destroyed, and only other success was KG-27's destruction of 8 aircraft at Basel, and these are major airfields there of the Belgian Air Force, Belgian Army Air Corps, rather. And here we have Stuka Ju-87B fighters. In aerial combat, the battles were also one-sided. 2 HE-111s, 2 DO-17 bombers, and 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109 were shot down by Gloucester Gladiators and Hurricanes, and that's the British aircraft, Gloucester Gladiators and Hurricanes. In return, 8 Belgian Gladiators, 5 Fairey Foxes, and 1 CR-42 were shot down by JG-1, 21, and 27. Number 18, Squadron RAF sent 2 Bristol Blenheims on operation over the Belgian front, but lost both to Bf-109s. So these aircraft, it was futile because it was very one-sided. The Germans had better tactics and better training, and were able to outmaneuver much of the Royal Air Force contingent and Belgian Air Force certainly. By the end of the 10th of May, the official German figures indicate claims for 30 Belgian aircraft destroyed on the ground and 14 plus the 2 RAF bombers in the air for about 10 losses. The victory claims were likely an undercount. A total of 83 Belgian machines, mostly trainers and squadron hacks, were destroyed. The AEMI flew only 146 sorties in the first 6 days. Between 16th and the 28th of May, AEMI flew just 77 operations. It spent most of its time retreating and fuel withdrawing and of course most of its time was retreating and fuel was withdrawing in the face of Luftwaffe attacks. The German planners had recognized the need to eliminate Fort Ibn Imal if their army was to break into the interior of Belgium. It decided to deploy airborne forces to land inside the fortress perimeters using gliders. And so, certainly, as I mentioned this before, using special explosives and flamethrowers to disable the defenses, the Faustungsjäger had then entered the fortress. In the ensuing battle, German infantry overcame the defenders of the Belgians' 7th Infantry Division, Belgian Corps, the 1st Belgian Corps 7th Infantry Division in 24 hours. The main Belgian defense line had been breached, and German infantry of the 18th Army had passed through it rapidly. Moreover, German soldiers had established bridgeheads across the Albert Canal before the British were able to reach it some 48 hours later. The Chasseurs Ardennais further south, on the orders of their commander, withdrew behind the Maas, destroying some bridges in their wake. The German airborne forces were assisted by Junkers Ju-87 Stukas, the 3rd Sturmkampfjägerschwager, the Luftwaffe, STG-2, and SCG-77 helped suppress the defenses. Actually, HS-123s of 2nd S. Lichtenwager LG-2 were assisted in the capture of the bridges at Ronhoven and Veldwezelt in the immediate area. So this is early in the ensuing. This is the first day and more of the ensuing start of the Battle of Belgium. The most serious combat to evolve on the 12th of May, as 2 days after the initial invasion, was the beginning of the Battle of Hanut, 12th to 14th of May, a major armored battle. While the German armies, Group A, advanced through the Belgian Ardennes, Army Group B's 6th Army launched an offensive operation toward the Gamble Gap. The Gamble Gap occupied a position in the Belgian plain. It was an unfortified, untrenched space in the main Belgian defense line. The gap stretched from the southern end of the dial line, from Waver in the north to Namur in the south, 20 kilometers, 12 miles, to 30 kilometers, 19 miles. After attacking out of the Maastricht Bulge, Maastricht Bulge, and defeating the Belgian defenses at Leek, which compelled the Belgian First Corps to retreat. The German Sixth Army's 16th Corps, Panzer Motorized Corps, under the command of General Erich Hoppner, and containing the 3rd and 4th Panzer Divisions, launched an offensive in the area where the French mistakenly expected the main German thrust. The Gamble Gap was defended by the 1st French Army with 6 elite divisions, including the 2nd Division Léger Mécanique, or 2E DLM, and 3rd Light Mechanized Divisions. The Prios Cavalry Corps, under the command of Bren Gun Adolphe Prios, was to advance 30 kilometers, 19 miles, beyond the line east to provide a screen for the move. The French 1st and 2nd Armored Divisions were to be moved behind the 1st French armies to defend its main lines in depth. During the night of the 11th and 12th of May, the Belgians were fully engaged in withdrawing to the dial line, covered by a network of demolitions and rear guards astride Tolgeren. During the morning of the 12th of May, King Leopold III, General van Overstreeten, Other Deldar, General Alphonse Georges, commander of the 1st Allied Army Group, comprising the British Expeditionary Force, the 1st French Army, 2nd and 7th and 9th Armies, General Gaston Bilot, coordinator of the Allied armies, and General Henry Rields Powell, General Gord's chief of staff, met for a military conference near Mons. It was agreed the Belgian army would man the Antwerp-Leuven line, while its armies took up the responsibility of defending the extreme north and south of the country. The Belgian 3rd Corps and its 1st Chasseurs Ardennes, 2nd Infantry and 3rd Infantry Divisions had withdrawn from the Leg fortifications to avoid being encircled. One regiment, the Leg Fortress Regiment, stayed behind to disrupt the German communications. Further to the south, the Namur Fortress, manned by 6th Corps, 5th Infantry Division, and the 2nd Chasseurs Ardennes, with the 12th French Infantry Division, fought delaying actions and participated in a lot of demolition work while guarding the position. Different positions are being held as they're trying to figure out how to push back. As far as the Belgians were concerned, it had accomplished the only independent mission assigned to it, to hold the Leg Albert Canal line long enough for the Allied units to reach friendly forces occupying the Namur-Antwerp-Givet line. For the remainder of the campaign, the Belgians would execute their operations in accordance with the overall Allied plan. So here we have a French tank. This is the AMC-35. It's a French World War II medium cavalry tank, ACG-1. It can be found at the French Tank Museum in Saumur, in the in the Loire Valley. The AMC-35 was used by the Belgian Army in 1940 against the German invasion. The Belgian Army designated them the ACG-1. So the tank battle of Hanut. This is the first full tank-on-tank battle of the Second World War. From the 12th to the 14th of May 1940, the 3rd and the 4th Panzer Divisions of the 16th Corps, 16th Corps Motorized Corps, of the Wehrmacht clashed with the 1st and 2nd Light Mechanized Divisions of the French Cavalry in Hanut, Belgium. This was the first large-scale tank battle of World War II. In total, 1,200 German and French tanks took part in the fighting. Panzer IIIs formed the backbone of the German armor during the invasion of Western Europe. It came equipped with a 3.7 centimeter gun and faced challenging battles because the Western Allies had more heavily armored tanks. However, General Hans Guderian, the German military leader who pioneered mobile armored warfare, Blitzkrieg, and that part of Blitzkrieg, as I mentioned, had ensured that German armor had a good balance between firepower, mobility, and protection. This agility was the key to the German victory in the early days of the Second World War. On the 10th of May 1940, the Germans activated Vogelb, or Case Yellow, Panzer Group Kleist, Panzer Group Kleist, the main force of Army Group A, went through the Ardennes forest between Belgium and Luxembourg, then entered northern France and headed for the English Channel. At the same time, Army Group B, located further north, entered Belgium. In this way, they isolated the main body of the British and French forces in Belgium and in northern France. Panzer Group Kleist ended up behind the Allied force and would aim to crush the Allies with Army Group B in a classic hammer and anvil move. In order to increase the power of Army Group B, OKH allocated a Panzer Corps under Army Group B. This was the 16th Corps, Motorized Corps commanded by General Erich Hoppner. It had the 3rd and 4th Panzer Divisions with 620 tanks in total, 498 Panzer Is and IIs, 73 Panzer IIIs, and 52 Panzer IVs. The Panzer IV, which you see here, the German Panzer IVs B, Panzer IV the Panzer IV performed the fire support for Panzer IIIs during this period, right? So this here is a Panzer IV. Its short barrel, 7.5 centimeter L24 gun could only destroy armored vehicles if it used heat ammunition, high explosive anti-tank. On the other hand, the commanders of the French and British troops had thought that the Ardennes force was impassable. They believed that the Germans would enter northern France through Belgium, just like they did in World War I, because Belgium was neutral. Allied forces would not deploy along the border between Belgium and Germany, and they had to wait for German forces to take action first. As mentioned in Allied plans, their troops would access the border between Belgium and France, and then push to the river Dyle after the Germans invaded Belgium. The Allies would then form a continuous defense line to prevent German forces from advancing. According to Allied military doctrine, they would build and fortify line after line of defenses to resist German invasion, reminiscent of static defense lines built during World War I. So H-35 tanks of the 2nd Regiment, you see here, H-35 and M-35, or S-35s and H-35s. Second and Third Light Mechanized Division of the French Army during field maneuvers. Of course, the French had developed their tanks with a focus on mechanized cavalry. Their four mechanized divisions were full of high quality personnel and equipment. The mission of the French cavalry was to stall the advancement of German forces and buy time for the main body of the Allies to deploy. The Corps de Cavaliers was a fully mechanized unit force consisting of the 2nd and 3rd Light Mechanized Divisions. The Division Léger Mécanique was a traditionally famous cavalry force which was mechanized by the French Army and equipped with modern armored vehicles. These two light mechanized divisions had 600 tanks and vehicles, including 239 Samoa S-35 tanks, 172 H-35 tanks, 66 AMR 35 tanks, and 90 Panhard 178 armored scout cars. After the war began, the French cavalry entered Belgium and headed for the strategically important Gambourg's Gap. These two light mechanized divisions pushed to the village of Hanut and deployed there in order to cover the Gambourg's Gap. In the meantime, the German 16 motorized corps broke through the Dutch and Belgian positions and raced toward the Gambourg's Gap, and where they were. A giant tank battle would break out soon, and as it did, we can see Panzer I's, 2's, and 3's. Unlike the French, the Germans concentrated their tanks in large formations and intended to break through enemy lines and create openings for the rest of their forces. According to their assigned mission and doctrine of armored warfare, the armored troops of the French Cavalry Corps, light mechanized divisions, were deployed along the Darremenhut front. Hanut was right in the center of that front. The 3rd Light Mechanized Division was deployed along the Darlemont-Hanut line, whereas the 2nd Light Mechanized Division was deployed along the Hanut-Hut line. At the same time, the 3rd and 4th Panzer Divisions stormed side by side toward the point where the two French divisions met. In the morning of 12th of May, German armor formed a wedge-shaped formation and charged into French positions near Hanut. Intense fighting broke out everywhere. On this day, the German advance was stopped by fierce resistance from the French armored cavalry. On the second day, the Germans attacked again. General Hupner ordered his troops to concentrate their attack on one point of the French line. Because the French forces were spread evenly, the 3rd Light Mechanized Division came under heavy pressure from a concentrated German attack. This is a major pincer movement. Spoiling attacks by German infantry units also prevented nearby French forces. Spoiling attacks by German infantry units also prevented nearby French forces. Didn't support right away. With the help of the Luftwaffe, the German 16th Motorized Corps broke through the French defenses along the Darremenhut line. French Cavalry Corps withdrew to Perwez right away, with German armor hot on their heels, and so the Germans were stopped there on the second day, and the tank battle of Hanut came to an end. German armored units took severe losses. Although the German Panzer divisions maintained their large formations during this period, 2 brigades, 4 regiments, their tanks were mostly the light Panzer I's and 2's. There were not many main battle tanks such as the Panzer IIIe, and they were still equipped with 3.7 centimeter KWK L45 guns. They're smaller guns, which were not sufficiently powerful against the hard-skinned S-35 and H-35 French tanks. Only Panzer IVs with their 7.5 centimeter guns could fight against the French tanks. And I thought there was a few of the Charbis in there somewhere, but they were mainly an infantry tank. So they were in alongside the infantry support units. Most German tank crews could fight the French tanks only with personnel. Most German tank crews could fight the French tanks only with personal resolution and courage by flanking them and attacking weak points through their sides and rears. Due to the inferior firepower and armor on most of their tanks, the Germans suffered heavily. 160 German tanks were destroyed by French tanks. However, because the Germans took control of the battlefield in the end, most of their damaged and destroyed tanks were repaired and sent back into service. In the end, the Germans lost 49 tanks, damaged beyond repair, whereas the French Cavalry Corps lost 121 tanks. The Battle of Hanut was the first clash between German and French armored doctrines, including tank design concepts and combat tactics. According to General Guderian, the bulk of the German armor, consisting of Panzer IIIs and IVs, had a good balance between firepower, mobility, and armor. And certainly armor heavily on the front side, the front section of the later Panzer IIIs and IV tanks, and were capable of a long-distance pursuit. This enabled the German tanks to execute the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Combat effectiveness of German armor was much higher as well. Because their tanks were manned by 5 crewmen, this reduced reaction time and spread out the stress placed on the tank crew. The French, on the other hand, stressed the importance of armor over mobility. Their vehicles were more suited to static defense. Although their heavy armor gave the German tankers plenty of grief, they lost strategically because the Germans would control the battlefield and outflank them at every juncture. The French lost 30 S-35 tanks in this battle, some of which were abandoned by their crew because they ran out of fuel. The insufficient combat radius was the main weakness in French tanks. To the Allies, the Belgian failure to hold onto its eastern frontiers, they were thought to be capable of holding out for 2 weeks, was a disappointment. The Allied Chiefs of Staff had sought to avoid an encounter mobile battle without any strong fixed defenses to fall back on, and hoped Belgian resistance would last long enough for a defensive line to be established. Nevertheless, a brief lull fell on the Dial front on 11th of May, which enabled the Allied armies to get into position by the time the first major assault was launched the following day. Allied cavalry had moved into position, and infantry and artillery were reaching the front more slowly by rail. Although unaware of it, the first Allied Army group, and the Belgian Army outnumbered and outgunned Walter von Richelieu's German Sixth Army. This is something interesting. Some more information that I did know and didn't know, which is great. On the morning of 12th May, in response to Belgian pressure and necessity, the Royal Air Force and the Armée de l'Air undertook several attacks on the Belgian-held Maastricht and Maas bridges to prevent German forces flowing into Belgium. So I've added some stuff in here and some different texts that some I did know and some I didn't know, and wanted to add this in together as much as I can get as much data as possible out to everybody. 74 sorties had been flown by the Allies since 10th of May. On the 12th of May, 11 out of 18 French Berger 693 bombers were shot down. The RAF advanced air striking force, which included the largest Allied bomber force, was reduced to 72 aircraft out of 135 by the 12th of May. For the next 24 hours, missions were postponed as the German anti-aircraft and fighter defenses were too strong. The result of the bombing is difficult to determine. And let's see. Oh, the German 19th German 19th Corps War Diary Situation Summary at 2000 hours on the 14th of May noted. Okay, here's before I note that, here's some German Panzer IIs in Western Belgium. On the morning of 15th of May, German Army Group A broke through the defenses at Sudan and was now free to drive forward to the English Channel. The Allies considered a wholesale withdrawal from the Belgian trap. The withdrawal would reflect three stages: the night of the 16th and 17th of May to the river Seine, the night of 17th and 18th to the river Denter, and the night of 18th and 19th of May to the river Scheldt. The Belgians were reluctant to abandon Brussels and Leuven, especially as the Dial line had withstood German pressure well. The Belgian Army, the British Expeditionary Force, and the First French Army, in a domino effect, was forced to retire on 16th of May to avoid their southern flanks from being turned by the German armored forces advancing through the French Ardennes and the German 6th Army advancing through the Gimblo. The Belgian Army was holding the German 14th Army on the KW line along the French 7th and along with the French 7th and British armies. Had it not been for the collapse of the French 2nd Army at Sudan, the Belgians were confident they could have checked the German advance. The situation called for the French and British to abandon the Antwerp and Namur line and strong positions in favor of improving positions along the Scheldt without facing any real resistance. In the south, General Desfontaines of the Belgian 7th Corps retreated from the Namur and Ligue regions. The Ligue Fortress region put up stiff resistance to the German 6th Army. In the north, the 7th Army was diverted to Antwerp after the surrender of the Dutch on the 15th of May, but was then diverted to support the French 1st Army. In the center, the Belgian Army and the British Expeditionary Force suffered little German pressure. On the 15th of May, the only sector to really be tested was around Louvain, which was held by the British 3rd Division. The British Expeditionary Force was not pursued vigorously to the Scheldt. After the withdrawal of the French army from the northern sector, the Belgians were left to guard the fortified city of Antwerp. 4 infantry divisions, including the 13th and 17th Reserve Infantry Divisions, engaged the German 18th Army's 208th, 225th, and 526th Infantry Divisions. The Belgians successfully defended the northern part of the city, delaying the German infantry forces while starting to withdraw from Antwerp on the 16th of May. The city fell on 18th and 19th of May after considerable Belgian resistance. On the 18th of May, the Belgians received word that Namur's Fort Merchevolet had fallen. Surly fell on the 19th of May, and Saint Hubert and Melun on 27th of May. Dave Meseret and Endoy on 23rd of May. These are all cities in Belgium, towns. By 19th of May, the Germans were hours away from reaching the French Channel coast. Gort had discovered the French had neither had a plan nor reserves, and little hope of stopping the German thrust to the English Channel. To the Channel. He was concerned that the French First Army on its southern flank had been reduced to a disorganized mass of fagans, what they call, fearing that German armor might appear on their right flank at Arras or Peronne, striking for the channel ports of Calais and Boulogne, or northwest into the British flank. Their position in Belgium massively compromised. The British Expeditionary Force considered abandoning Belgium and retreating to Ostend, Bergs, or Dunkirk, the latter lying some 10 kilometers, 6.2 miles, to 15 kilometers, 9.3 miles, inside the French border. The proposals of a British strategic withdrawal from the continent was rejected by the War Cabinet and the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, CIGS. They dispatched General Ironside to inform Gort of their decision and to order him to conduct an offensive to the southwest through all opposition to reach the main French forces. In the south, the strongest French forces were actually in the north. The Belgian army was asked to conform to the plan, or should they choose, the British Royal Navy would evacuate what units they could. The British cabinet decided that even if the Somme offensive was carried out successfully, some units may still need to be evacuated, and ordered Admiral Ramsay to assemble a large number of vessels. This was the beginning of Operation Dynamo and the British escape at Dunkirk. The British were cut off. They had their ports. They had that one port at Dunkirk, and they had to bring over thousands upon thousands of civilian vessels. An army of 450,000 troops. They had to leave all their equipment, their tanks equipment there, and they had to come across by whatever boats necessary, fishing boats, trawlers, from warships to any even just regular small boats, and they were remarkable at rescuing over 300,000. So here we have the strategic situation in Belgium and France on the 21st of May, as the French First Army and of course the British Expeditionary Forces are being pushed back, and the Belgian Army being pushed along with it. Von Bock's here, Sith here, Walkowitz, Klung, Richelieu, and they're pushing in. Of course, British forces our infantry forces are organizing on the 19th of May right here, and you can see Calais, and then you can see here Dunkirk, where it all ends for the British on the continent at the time. The Belgian position on any offensive move was made clear by Leopold III. As far as he was concerned, the Belgian army could not conduct offensive operations as it lacked tanks and aircraft. It existed solely for defense. The king also made clear that in the largely shrinking area of Belgium, still free, there was only enough food for 2 weeks. Leopold did not expect the British Expeditionary Force to jeopardize its own position in order to keep contact with the Belgian army, but he warned the British that if it persisted with the southern offensive, the Belgians would be overstretched and their army would collapse. In the aftermath of this failure, the Belgians were asked to fall back to the Iser River and protect the Allied left flank and rear areas. The King's aide, General Overstraten, said that such a move could not be made and would lead to the Belgian armies disintegrating. Another plan for further offensives was suggested. The French requested the Belgians withdraw to the WWII, and the British to the French frontier between Mulde and Halun, with other towns in Belgium. The Belgians were then to extend their front to free further parts of the British Expeditionary Force for the attack. The French First Army would relieve 2 more divisions on the right flank. Leopold was reluctant to overtake such a move because it would abandon all but a small portion of Belgium. The Belgian army was exhausted, and it was an enormous technical risk that would take too long to complete. At this time, the Belgians and the British concluded that the French were beaten, and the Allied armies in the pocket on the Belgian-Franco border would be destroyed if action was not taken. The British, having lost confidence in their allies, decided to look to the survival of the British Expeditionary Force. The Belgian battlefront on the morning of 22nd of May extended for some 90 kilometers, 6 miles, from north to south, beginning with the Cavalry Corps, which checked its advance at Trenauzen, 5th, 2nd, 6th, 7th, and 4 Corps, all Belgian, were drawn up side by side. 2 further signal corps were guarding the coast. These formations were then largely holding the eastern front as the British Expeditionary Force and French forces withdrew to the west to protect Dunkirk, which was vulnerable to German assault on 22nd of May. The eastern front remained intact, but the Belgians now occupied their fortified position at Lair. The Belgian First Corps, with only 2 incomplete divisions, had been heavily engaged in the fighting, and their line was wearing thin. On that day, Winston Churchill visited the front and pressed for the French and British armies to break out from the northeast. He assumed that the Belgian Cavalry Corps could support the offensive's right flank. Churchill dispatched the following message to Gord. 1. That the Belgian army should withdraw to the line of the Yser and stand there. The sills being and of course the sloughs being opened. 2nd, that the British Army and French First Army should attack southwest toward Bapaume and Cabaret at the earliest moment. Certainly tomorrow, with about 8 divisions and with the Belgian Cavalry Corps on the right of the British. And that's what he said. So here we have German advance to the English Channel after the 21st of May. And Fedor von Bock, Kleist are pushing forward, and Kleist is pushing back further into northern France. Bock is here, 6th is here, and the British Expeditionary Force is here, and they're all retreating to Dunkirk. Calais is isolated on 22nd of May, surrendered on the 27th of May. So the perimeter is established on the 28th of May, and evacuation is completed on the night of the 4th and 5th of June from Dunkirk. So here we have just a further push from the going into the English Channel, and the Belgian. Here's the Belgian Army on 27th of May. The British Expeditionary Force here. So this is, I'm trying to think here. This is further up. Okay, Ypres. There's Ypres. This may be. Yep. Here's May 26th and 27th. And then I believe that, so the British Expeditionary Force is being pushed back, and they're going into Dunkirk, down in this sector here. The Belgian Army was stretched from Kudzen south to Minan on the river, on the river Lye, and west from Meinum to Bergs, without any sort of reserves, with the exception of a few RAF sorties. The air was exclusively under the control of the Luftwaffe, and the Belgians reported attacks against all targets considered an objective, with resulting casualties. No natural obstacle remained between the Belgians and the German army. Retreat was not feasible. The Luftwaffe had destroyed most of the rail networks to Dunkirk. Just 3 roads were left: Bergs, Toyhut, uh, Demude, Bergs, Castells, Newport, and Bergs, Ostend, and Newport. Um, Newport, Newport and Bergs. Okay, so that's a connection there. Yeah. Using such axis of retreat was impossible without losses, owing to German air supremacy. As opposed to air supremacy, um, yeah, German air supremacy, of course, held the day for the Wehrmacht. Water supplies were damaged and cut off. Gas and electricity supplies were also cut. Canals were drained and used as supply dumps for whatever ammunition and foodstuffs were left. The total remaining area covered just 1,700 kilometers and compacted military and civilians alike, of which the later numbered some 3 million people. Under these circumstances, Leopold deemed further resistance useless. On the evening of 27th May, he requested an armistice. King surrenders 300,000 Belgians. Churchill sent a message to Keyes at the same day and made clear what he thought of the request. Belgian embassy here resumes from King's decision to remain. Belgian embassy here assumes from King's decision to remain that he regards the war as lost and contemplates an armistice peace, a separate peace. So contemplates a separate peace. It is in order to dissociate itself from this that the constitutional Belgian government has resembled on foreign soil. Even if present Belgian Army has to lay down its arms, there are 200,000 Belgians of military age in France and greater resources than Belgium had in 1914, which to fight back. And that is true. They had more resources to fight back than in 1914. By present decision, the king is dividing the nation and delivering it into Hitler's protection. Please convey these considerations to the king and impress upon him the disastrous consequences to the Allies and to Belgium at his present choice. So this is the casualty count of course, in Belgium. This is just Belgium alone. So the British numbers for the Battle of Belgium are unknown, but the British suffered the following losses throughout the entire campaign: 10th of May to June 22nd. So 68,111 killed in action, wounded or captured. 64,000 vehicles lost, destroyed. That's, of course, left behind at Dunkirk as well. 2,472 guns destroyed or abandoned. RAF losses throughout the entire campaign, 10th of May to June 22nd, amounted to 931 aircraft and 1,526 casualties. Casualties to 28 May are unknown. British losses in the air numbered 300. The British losses in the air numbered 344 between the 12th and the 25th of May, and 138 between 26th of May and June 1st. The Wehrmacht had the consolidated report from the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht regarding the operations in the West from 10th May to June 4th. Different commanders, the Wehrmacht, their operations, Oberkommandos. Of course, so this is the report from 10th of May to June 4th. Reports 10,232 officers and soldiers killed, 8,463 officers and soldiers missing. So over 10,232 killed, 8,463 officers and soldiers Missing, wounded, 42,523 officers and soldiers. Losses to the Luftwaffe from 10th of May to June 3rd, 432 aircraft. And losses to the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, none, of course. The French, the numbers for the Battle of Belgium are unknown, but the French suffered the following losses throughout the entire Western campaign, from the 10th of May to June 22nd. So that would be June 20 to the surrender of France itself. So 90,000 killed, 200,000 wounded, prisoners of war 1.9 million. Total French losses in aircraft numbering 264 on the 12th and 25th of May, and 50 for 26th to the 1st of June. So, and in Belgium itself, the casualties stood at roughly killed in action 6,093, and 2,000 Belgian prisoners died in captivity. Missing more than 500, captured 200,000, wounded 15,850, and 112 aircraft destroyed. Amazing.